Hello there, Beard here. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, handy listeners, such as you are. Over the past week, you will have seen the first batch of Free Cities Draft rookies. You've seen the blogs from Steamforge, and hopefully, if you've been paying attention, listen to Panzer, Connor, and myself wax lyrical about our super hot takes. But I am joined today by Chief AI at Steamforge, Mr. Jamie Perkins. Hello, Jamie.
Hello, Rich. How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, chap. Very well. I wanted to invite on once more to BeardPod to discuss more sort of the design philosophy behind these changes or these introductions of new players.
Yeah.
It's called Free Cities Draft last year, sort of culminating at SteamCon. Fantastic community project that we've seen, similar to the ones we've seen in the past, but very, very different because presumably a lot of the character and almost the flavour of the characters was nailed down before the draft even happened?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, at least we had a lot of ideas in our heads of where the characters were going to go. Sherwin spent quite a lot of time coming up with the different characters, and we batted a few ideas back and forth. Me and Bryce got to throw a couple, and Matt as well got to throw a few ideas into the pot as well. Like the inspiration for Cammy, for instance, was that I was fascinated by this idea of like a sort of Eastern/Asian and Oriental inspired sort of gunslinger,
sort of Hong Kong cinema.
Duelist. Yeah, for instance, that was one of the ones I got thrown into the pot. The majority of them have come from Sherwin, but yeah, we had some ideas of where each one was going to go beforehand, and it was a hell of a lot of fun to do. We spent quite a lot of time discussing the various characters, and it took a lot more setup to do this draft than the previous one, just because we wanted to. With the previous draft, when it was, I wasn't the draft, was it? With the previous. With union chains, thank you, yes. We knew there was existing characters, so we knew that there would immediately be a buy-in for everyone wanting to get involved, and there's a sense of loss there for if they didn't get a character that they wanted, because they knew kind of what the kind of character they were going to get into. Yeah. Whereas with this new Free Cities draft, we weren't so sure, because these are brand new characters, characters that customers aren't familiar with, but a fan base aren't familiar with, and that sales speech. I've been spending so much time in the marketing office, and so we basically wanted to make sure that it was something that people would get behind. I remember, for instance, being quite skeptical the first time we spoke about it, because I was really worried about that people just wouldn't care. But then was really pleasantly surprised by that people really loved, getting behind these characters and getting to grips with them based on, when you think about it, so little knowledge. When you had a headshot and a bit of story, and people really got to grips with the characters and were like, I want this character. This character sounds fantastic, and it was great to see.
No more sort of exemplified than in Amber, both the Farmers Guild community and the Brewers Guild community sort of vying for Amber's attentions, and that kind of Farmers very much going to go, oh, we'll give her a home, like she can come and join us, kind of thing, and the Brewers players almost taking a sort of a path of redemption of like, oh, we forgive you. You can know nothing more about this lass at that point other than the fact that she'd been kicked out. Yeah. But that was enough. That was enough to sort of like capture people's imaginations and to have them registering games in a furore.
And there absolutely were some. There definitely were some. I can't think of the right way to phrase this. We wanted to push certain rookies in certain ways, and obviously it's entirely possible for a rookie to end up anywhere. The only one that we were really, really worried about is if the blacksmiths got hold of Flea, because having
they don't have any mascots.
That would have been a real problem to trying to fix that. And I'm glad that we didn't have to work with that problem. But genuinely, all the rest of the other rookies could have ended up anywhere, and it would have been fine. But there were a couple of ones that we definitely pushed in certain ways with the story, and with the bits and pieces of information that we did give people. So, for instance, Cutlass is one, I guess, but it's actually more to do with Lane and Amber, in the sense that we absolutely knew that the Brewers would want to try and get Amber back. Or at least that we certainly had a strong feeling that they would want to. Because it's almost a sense of loss. Like if someone says this is a character that was part of your guild and they're not anymore, but you've got a chance to get them back. And most people kind of like a redemption story, or nobody likes the sense of loss of losing something that they feel they had. And at the same time, we were quite confident in the fact that if we put into the Lane story that we basically said to the butchers, you don't want this character, or you shouldn't get this character. We knew that would kind of get their backs up a bit and go, fine, we'll take him then. All right, well, good then, because we kind of hoped you would in some ways. Or at least Sherwin did. Me and Bryce
You're showing your mortician's roots there, Jamie. With your manipulation.
Yeah. Well, I guess a little bit, but to be honest, most of it came from Sherwin. And remember, Sherwin is being the grand author of all that, including Obulus. That makes people forget that sometimes. So people think about me and going, "Oh yeah, he's the mortician control player." This is true, but don't forget who wrote the characters in the first place.
So we spoke at the playtest last year, which is for the season 4 playtest, because we were talking about Vetronox, and there's me sort of going, he should have goad, you should totally give him goad, and you're going, no, like butchers should never have hard control, right? Which is a conversation that I've referenced a number of times, but it was a very seminal conversation that I had to understand the design space of each guild. Yep. So with that in mind, if you have an idea, I imagine, or I say you here as the development team as a whole, which of course is growing and growing and growing. It's like an enormous team now, I'm sure. Yep. Of the design spaces that you expect a butcher's player, a farmer's player to be, and that in your mind, if you were given a complete blank slate, I suppose, like you were with the introduction of players like Locus and Brain Pain and Memory, was that end of season 2, beginning of season 3? I forget exactly when that happened. That the next time we introduce a butcher's player, I want them to be X kind of a thing. I imagine that's already some stuff that you've got penciled in your brain, even if it's just very,
well,
very
it's written down. It's not something that we'll ever show the public, but it is something when you're working in design development, when you're working on expansions to an existing game, it's always a good idea to write down any assumptions that you're making beforehand or design guides. I always work on the premise that you want to find your boundaries as quickly as possible, because once you found your boundaries, literally the extent to which your ideas can be pushed. So one of the ways in which we do this is by having officially written down definitions of what we expect each guild to be. Gotcha. And that will therefore help us design players. We'll come up with an initial design. If we like the concept, we'll make up an initial card and then have a look at that and then compare that back to the guild overviews, as we call them. And if they are dramatically different or they're not matching that in one of the key pillars of those guilds, then of that guild, then we have to go back and question it and go back to redesign. It's something else that helps us ensure that we stay within the lines of the accepted parts of the Venn diagram, I guess.
No, that makes sense.
Sorry, go on.
I imagine we could probably hazard a guess at a number of those things. The concept of a brewer's playbook, the idea that all butchers' momentous results, all butchers' damage results are momentous. There's going to be little things that we could probably pinpoint and go, okay, this is a defining feature of X. Farmers have 2-on-1, that kind of thing. But I also imagine there's a lot within that mood book for a guild, for want of a better expression, that we don't know about.
Yeah, there's some pretty obvious factors. There are some less obvious factors.
Cool. So when you're then presented with a player which is in a position which may not necessarily fit the design space of a guild, I'll use Lane as an example before we come on to talk to Lane, but it's an interesting one of going, here is a butcher striker. How do you make him both a striker and a butcher?
Well, there's even a further point than that, because Matt really set down the goal. He loves doing this. He loves laying down the goal line and going, I'm going to give you a challenge and you've got to figure out a way it can work. And we're like, fine, thanks. And then just publicly in front of everyone at the SteamCon, the reveal of the Free Cities draft results at the SteamCon keynote, and just without telling us he was going to do it, just said, by the way, he's going to be a better striker than Shark. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Cheers.
And we thought, what would be awesome about Lane is if we had a striker who had the potential to be a better striker than Shark.
Particular quote, I remember standing up and going, come on!
I think the favourite one was, I'm going to say something, and you stood up. And you were ready to, and it was like, the next thing we're doing is going to be a household name, and I could just literally see you going, that's acceptable. All right, fine. I'll sit back down again. I'm not going to. I'm not going to interfere. So how is that? Does that make it more challenging? Sort of being pushed outside of that design space. Does that make it more? Or is it an enormous pain in the? Frankly, if someone goes, right, make a butcher striker that's better than Shark, go.
It's kind of all of the above. It's a bit of a pain at first, but then when you start to unravel it and find a couple of bits and pieces of putting it together, then it starts to become really interesting and fun. And it's always very cool to add something to it. It's always the aim to add something to a guild that they didn't have before, but it has also got to be something they're allowed to have within their constraints, within their design constraints. And being able to find those bits and pieces that you didn't know existed before is a very fun challenge. Sometimes it can be a real head scratcher. There are certain guilds that we spend a long time thinking about because that space seems to be a bit small. You could call it design space if you want. The design space seems to be a bit more constrained in certain guilds than others. But in certain cases it's a bit easier, and it always ends up being really fun. But sometimes it's a bit of a head scratcher.
Okay, interesting. So then, let's have a look at the rookies themselves. I believe we've got them both in the same document in front of us. So let's have a little look at Lane. Certainly one of the most vied over rookies from the draft. One of the sort of headlining acts, which makes sense given how much he's forefront in the story. Obviously, Butchers already have a striker in Brisket. So how do you make Lane not Brisket, if that makes sense?
That is a problem we thought about for quite a while. There are some things that we knew we could bring into Lane that weren't already there in the Butchers, and that's mainly because Brisket is a season 1 model. She's had some changes since season 1 of the game. She's a couple of changes that happened to her, but overall she's kind of remained working in a very similar manner that she always has. She's a very straightforward striker. She has quite often a naturally high defense and armor, which makes it an unpredictable movement. It makes it quite difficult to get the ball off her. So she's good at holding the ball as well. But overall, not that tricky. Just a good little ball of stats, really. And not many things like combination results apart from dodge and damage. So we knew there was a couple of the more later creations in Guild Ball's life that we could bring in onto Lane, such as combination playbook results. Which some are visible, some are not so visible, depending on which side of the card you're looking at. So we knew that we could bring in some of the more complicated, more recent developments, I guess, than into the game. And on top of that, we knew that the main thing that we needed to do was address this. At least it was in the forefront of our mind. We need to address this challenge that Matt had set to us in front of everyone at SteamCon. And the thing is, people might not remember it because overall there was only a couple hundred people in that room, and there's more people than that play Guild Ball in the world. So not everyone might have been aware of it, but it was certainly at the forefront of our minds that we had to meet this challenge when we were designing Lane. And we determined the way in which we were going to do that was by letting him roll a potentially bananas number of kick dice, because
makes sense.
If we basically decided to diagnose the problem and go, so he said better striker than shark. What does that question mean?
What does that mean? Does that mean a better goal scorer, better dodger?
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, what we couldn't do is we couldn't make Shark 2.0 and just have him be Shark in every way. We couldn't make a better version of Shark. That obviously wouldn't fit inside the guild in the slightest. But we could take one of those aspects and make him better than Shark, at least one of those things. And one of the things that would be much simpler to do is the number of kick dice. And you can link that quite easily into how the Butchers operate by making him gain more kick dice each time he damages an enemy model, and then suddenly you're in a much more comfortable design space for where the Butcher's guild already sits.
Yeah.
That, and it's also just comedy trying to think about how many dice you can roll in a single kick. Now, this is one of the things that we expect people are going to have a bit of a strong reaction to at first, until they realise it actually, once you start getting above sort of 4 or 5 dice for a normal kick, and then once you start getting above sort of 6 dice for a snapshot, it doesn't really matter anymore. Like you can get, I can do this. I can put Berserk on him from Veteran Ball, and I can get him up to like 12 kick dice. Cool. Once you get past sort of 5, 6, you're adding like 0.025 or whatever it is percentage chance to hit with your kicks, and it just isn't. It's not worth the effort anymore. It's comedy, and it's definitely better on snapshots because the scaling is higher, because obviously you need the 2 hits.
Sure.
But it's something that's there more for comedy value than anything else, or if you just really, really want to make sure you definitely hit the kick. But it's definitely something that we expect to be a strong reaction to initially.
I mean, I think that's almost now something to put into your mood book of the design brief of the Butchers, is that the initial response should be, "Oh my god, what the hell have they done?" And it's only when you sort of see it on the table and get used to seeing it, playing against it, you realise, oh, okay, no, that's not quite what I thought, as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you get to a player that's kind of more or less, hopefully, on the money, then you don't get that reaction. You get Veteran Gutter, and people are like, she's exactly what we asked for. well, that's a bit boring.
Fair.
But yeah, so we decided to take Lane, I guess, in a slightly more dynamic manner, and that's obviously he's got a slightly better access to, I guess, to dodge moves than Brisket, only slightly, I guess. And the fact that he's obviously got the viable acrobatics as well is important as well. Or sometimes he doesn't even have to pay for it, but he's definitely a bit more of an aggressive glass cannon. Definitely a lot more easy to bring down than Briskets, and just in these ways, we just thought we can add something that's a bit different to the Butcher's game style or play style, and it means that you've got an alternative choice for maybe what kind of striker you want the Butchers to do.
Yeah, and it's interesting because yes, that blood on the cleats or bleed the cleats, that's certainly something that draws the eye immediately, and I can see people trying to pinball off players up the pitch, getting that momentous one dodge on one, which is going to be a phenomenal result for him. To try and pinball their way up the pitch to get as much, and not just only as much distance, but also as many kick dice as possible. But then, of course, it occurs to me that every single one of those attacks that he's going to be making to try and bounce off other players is an opportunity for counterplay from me as his opponent, which I really like. That fact that he's going to try and to be doing all these sort of things. It's almost spot prize worthy, isn't it? Who can score the first 7 dice kicks that goal? But each one, if I have the momentum or if I've got poised players or things like that, is going to be, but this is my chance to stop you. And I quite like that. I quite like the idea that he's going to want to be super flashy, but that could well be his undoing, which is really nicely in keeping with the story that Sharon put together.
Yeah, absolutely, and he's got a little bit of tech to help him do that as well. And the fact that he's got that easy access, that lovely result on the first playbook result, which is a momentous 1 damage and dodge, so it'll help get momentum. It will help. It will get you momentum. It triggers bleed the cleats, and obviously it's a dodge move, trying to actually get around the board, get towards the goal as well, and. The fact that he's got quite a very, very low health pool means that people might even get in the habit of potentially just counter-attacking him just to put damage on him. And it's not something people do very often, but given he's got such a low health pool, it's actually not a terrible option. But knowing that this thing is probably going to happen to Lane is why he's also got close control, is because that will help him go into those situations, have those extra attacks to get bleed the cleats up and get close to the opposing goal, but take the occasional counter-attack, absorb a bit of damage, but it also means people aren't just going to get spiked up and got a cheeky tackle result. Well, luckily he's got a little bit of tech to allow him to play his game.
Sure.
Without it getting ridiculous.
Magic touch as well. Like, I mean, we've seen a similar thing with Thuggery on Avarice and Greed. We're adding a knockdown to every result, but adding a tackle to every result, that's spectacular. It's I suppose it's easier than just writing an additional T on every single column.
Yeah, we've definitely thought about it before, but yes, it just makes the playbook look nicer, and it also means that we've got the option. So when during development, playbook results are one of the things that shift around quite commonly, because they're one of the sort of smaller levers that we can pull on players to push them up and down. And adding Magic Touch on the back of the card for Lane allowed us the freedom to put naturally comboed results on the front of his playbook. So because Magic Touch allows him to have that tackle dodge on the first column and I think it's a tackle 3 damage on the last column, because you physically just can't put 3 different things into a playbook result or it starts to look really, really silly.
Yeah.
Whereas this effectively gives you that result without giving you the horrendous looking playbook on the front of the card. So it gives us more design freedom. So Magic Touch was actually one of the earlier things that we did so that we could change the playbook, and it gave us the freedom to do so when we needed to, is what I'm trying to get out.
And so presumably that tackle on 3 is just an instant burn of close control.
Yes, absolutely.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Obviously, with Get On With It Boy, there's shades of tutelage in here, but with the addition of condition removal.
Yeah.
Very, very fitting given his relationship with Ox, the fashion that Ox just sort of takes him under his wing immediately. Presumably this is going to work on both versions of Ox.
It should do. Yes, it will. Yeah.
So both captain and veteran squaddy Ox.
Yeah. Equivalent rules like the one that Friday has got for extra defense near Spigot works on either version of Spigot, so it should be fine.
I mean, but it was the intention here really to sort of ramp up that relationship with the mentor figure of Ox, and to make him stronger with one particular captain over another.
I mean, the second part of that's not necessarily true because of the existence of Veteran
Yeah.
But this one was the most backstory influenced rule by a long way, because obviously it is Ox showing that he is Lane's sponsor. And helping him deal with his difficult past. And this allowed us to do a couple of different things in terms of Lane's design. It allowed us to really keep him as a glass cannon model, because he's got a little bit of flexibility in terms of how he deals with conditions, and also that he can get away much more easily from dangerous situations when he can take a free dodge. And effectively against Shadowlag, I guess. So Ripley could swap acrobats with Shadowlags if he wants it for free, and means that whilst he does have a low health pool, he's got a couple of different bits and pieces, so that people are kind of going to have to take him out in one go, or you might not get another chance. And also happens to represent storyline very well at the same time.
Really reminds me of Shank. Just sort of the feel of the character. That's 4-row defense, low defense. I mean, you keep saying it's a low health pool, but as a Mortician's player, I keep looking at it and going, "That's pretty average as far as I'm concerned."
Yeah.
And the viable dodge. So yeah, it's nice because he feels like a butcher. He certainly feels more like he doesn't look or feel like Ox or Tenderizer in the center of the pitch, but he does feel like that. A sort of cross between Brisket and Shank. Which is somewhat unexpected. Excellent. Anything else on Lane before we move on?
I don't think so. Really, just really interested to see what people's reaction is to him, and hope people like him.
Excellent. So Amber then, first round, number 1 pick, off to the Farmers. Now Farmers are ones. I'm theorising here that probably have a very, very well defined guild philosophy, because they're so recently done, because they've so recently been changed as well, that you kind of know exactly what you want from a Farmers player.
Yeah, so they're I'm going to just step away from talking about Amber for a second, just talk about sort of Farmers and Blacksmiths.
Absolutely.
One of is a big portion of hindsight, which is difficult to get away from at the best of times and impossible to escape from when you're a game developer. Is one of the things that we probably did sort of not by accident, but one of the inverted commas design mistakes, I guess, of the Farmers and Blacksmiths overall is we had a concern that we were not sure whether we had enough design space in the game to give them unique rules and make them different from the existing guilds. And we obviously categorically proved ourselves wrong, because there are probably more unique elements within both the Blacksmiths and the Farmers than there are in any number of other
anywhere else.
Guilds. Yeah. So yes, what I'm coming around to is there's definitely one of the more easily definable guild overviews for the Farmers and the Blacksmiths as well.
So what we knew that Amber was coming in, but although she was an attacking, she's one of the midfield roles, which is perhaps one of the more nebulous, and you know what a striker's going to do, you know what a goalkeeper's going to do, but the midfielders can largely be anything you want them to be, I'm guessing. So what was what was lacking from the Farmers as a guild that you wanted the Amber to fill?
So apart from Thresher, I guess, as a single model, but obviously he's a captain, so he's in his own category. But within the squaddies for the Farmers, they they entirely expectedly suffer from not having many all-rounders. They're all seem to be quite specialists at one thing or another. There's not many of them that sort of just generally play very well. Whereas there seem to be these models in most of the other guilds, even if they're not. They're kind of jack of all trades, master of none. And Amber certainly was trying to fit a little bit of this, where she's got the left boot rule, so she can kick reasonably well, can get herself a 3-8 kick, and one of our own triggers, then suddenly she turns into a bit of a monster damage dealer. But she's not these things. She's not all of these things at once, and she's not all of these things all the time. And she can kind of do either job reasonably well if she needs to, and she can flex quite well. And this inflexibility is sometimes still causing the Farmers to occasionally have quite static player selection problems. You're often getting one team with a couple of flex spots, maybe for Thresher, and same thing for Grange. And we're one of the overall aims, the long-term aims for farmers, is to try and break this down as much as we can. We did a little bit of good work of that with the jump from season 3 to season 4, but ultimately we didn't widen that player selection as much as we would have hoped to. So it's still a long-term aim to try and do that with the farmers over time.
Gotcha.
One of the ways in which we're trying to do that with Amber is by giving them a bit more of an all-rounder.
Okay.
That can slot in at different places, where sometimes in some games you decide, actually, I need all of my specialists. I don't really need an all-rounder. And in other games you'll be going, actually, I need to change my plan up on the fly, so I'm going to need to take Amber as my all-round player.
Gotcha.
If that kind of thought process makes some sense.
No, absolutely. And it's interesting you mention, because of course she does have that history with the Brewers. She is wearing Friday's ribbon on her cut. Lovely detail in the artwork there. Enjoyed that. So the fact that one of her own event then effectively gives her a Brewers playbook, I thought was really, really nice. But it's like a part of her past that needs to be activated rather than something that's there the entire time. Left boot, very interesting how that's going to interplay with Grange's aura.
Yeah.
Just for these absolute howitzer goals coming in from deep within the pitch, but also one thing I noticed certainly that low momentous tackle result on Amber, which is going to be, I would imagine, very well received by Farmers players who, if they have lamented anything, it's going to be lack of ball retrieval. So that's, I think, particularly with the combined result with this new swerve shot, which is hilarious, to ignore intervening models. So I can really see her filling a hole, but not necessarily a hole that people are aware of, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think it's a fair way to put it.
I think you'll find people that just put her on the pitch because they go, I want to use her because she's cool and she's new and the model's fantastic, and and she was our pick in the draft and all of these things, and there's a lot to recognise on her card that makes her very intrinsically Farmers. The average defence, the no armour, the high health, and then just a swathe of momentous results.
Yeah, the other thing as well is that both with the momentous results as you pick out there, and for another reason, she's a little bit of consistency where it's possible the Farmers might have wanted some. So if you think about their squaddy Reapers, you've got, I guess, Tater, who is bringing a very consistent 2 damage for every attack playbook, and obviously the counter charge is nice as well.
Yeah.
And he's kind of your main Reaper for just going, I'm going to stick 4 influence on him, and I kind of know what my results are going to be. Whereas with Windle, with Fallow, etc., you've got with Bushel, obviously to a different extent because she's kicking the ball more. But with those, specifically with Fallow and Windle, there's an element of sort of setup required, or some other. You can't just go, here is 4 influence, go and do a thing. There's something else that's required beforehand, whether it's often a harvest marker for, not always for Windle, I guess, but you want to get the peak efficiency out of him for movement is the harvest marker. And then the same with Fallow, you kind of having to wait a number of activations. With Amber, you can just go, I'm going to know what I'm going to get out of it. If I just stick 4 influence on her and go, we'll go with that. And I imagine that simplicity there is going to be something that a number of farm players are going to like if they don't enjoy playing with Fallow or with Windle.
Yeah, no, I really like Amber. I just like the sort of the toolboxy approach and the fact that I can see games where she gets me a number of takeouts. I could see games where she gets me a number of goals, and that's quite cool to have that kind of reliability. Although still greedy in some ways, which is always going to be interesting for that. How much influence dare people not put on Thresher?
Yep.
Perfect. Lovely. Let's have a little look at Knuckles then. He's an interesting lad. This is possibly for me was one of the first big surprises in the draft. I didn't really expect Knuckles to go to the Fish, and he was also quite a he was one of the characters which we knew less about in terms of pitch presence than some of the others. We knew his mindset, we knew his backstory, and his relationship with Cammy, but aside from a life of violence which had left him scarred, didn't really know how he was going to fit upon the pitch aside from being a centre-back style figure. So is that, for you guys, easier then to make Knuckles a Fish player, or does that make it harder for having less to go off?
it was one that we expected to be difficult to begin with, and then once we kind of categorized him into, he's going to be the sort of the Corsair style of player where he is going to be allowed to come in and do damage. And because we have now removed all momentous damage from the Fisherman team from their playbooks, he was actually easier to design because we know what space we're working within in terms of coup de grace, for instance, with Corsair, and we also want to provide some options for playing him without Corsair, just as you want that with Kraken as well. Once we'd categorized him, that made him quite easy, a lot easier to design than we were expecting beforehand. As a side note, he's also definitely the winner of my favorite piece of artwork in all of the free.
It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
Stunning piece of artwork. And as soon as we were talking about him, whether he's going to be in the Fisherman team or not, obviously he's going to have a 2-inch melee zone. What weapon can he have? Anchor. Obviously, that's got to be it. Swing an anchor at people, because that's awesome.
Yep.
And that was one of those things that was just discussed once. Obviously, no, that's cool. That's the response. We never need to discuss that again. It's going to be an anchor. Done. Move on.
Done. I'm really looking forward to seeing people's tattoo work on his back. Seeing the I forget the name of the famous artist, but the Wave certainly springs to mind as so to have a look at here. Heavy tackle. That's going to be fun. I really like the idea of this because presumably there's no defense that stops that. I mean, you might have sturdy to prevent the knockdown aspect of it, but you're still losing possession of the ball.
Yeah, it gets around close control, and because we knew he was going to be a model that had a decent access to knockdown, we didn't want him to have the comedy hammer problem of if he's playing against someone that has close control but not sturdy, then he would pick that result and then knock them down without taking the ball off them. We didn't want Knuckles to have that problem specifically.
Excellent, and lots of pushes to fit into the sumo style of play style that some people enjoy with Corsair. The back of his card is quite something. The sort of synergy that Close Ranks is going to give him with Kraken is very interesting. Backfield presence is terrifying. Just a casual tack 8 player when he's in his own half. When he's attacking someone with the ball.
I mean, the other thing as well is that just to pick up on something else there, I'm pretty sure this is the first tack 6 squaddy that we've put into Fish.
Okay,
and added to that, when you've got the ball, he's not tack 6, he's tack 8.
Yeah,
and just that on its own is pretty awesome.
And even though that's a brand new rule, it reminds me of Jack. It reminds me of that. Was it Resolute that he was the first one to have before going to Gutter as well? Vet Gutter, sorry. So although these are like brand new things, these should be things that Fish players are used to, or like that. The concept of when under X condition I get a bonus kind of a thing. Yeah. And then you also have a little bit of the sort of the footballing orientated Granite playstyle with lightning reflexes and close ranks, and a pretty nice combination. We know that close ranks is great whenever you've got any kind of capacity to move during the opponent's turn. It can be a real pain to deal with. Add to that resilience, so that if he doesn't come into you, you can't just push him away with an attack either. No, he's going to be an absolute pain. He's going to be a real pain to deal with, and like Kraken is for me still that just sort of looks like an immediate partnership in the centre of the pitch, just to be an enormous pain to either take the ball off or take out. Because if I'm engaged by both of them, then going into Kraken, I have to attack Kraken, but I'm at -2 dice now because of closed ranks. It's just all kinds of no fun. Love it.
Yeah.
And he looks like with resilience as well, one of the first real sort of beneficiaries fish of it not being gluttonous mass anymore. Yeah, because he's not this giant fat lump. He's quite a dangerous looking individual.
Yeah, he's probably more of like your Gast build, where he's quite a big guy, but he's not he's lean. Particularly, he's lean. He's not particularly round at all.
Yeah. So coming back then to the Fish as a whole, is that a sort of we want to give a little boost to the Corsair style play style for that sort of grindier football game, for a more control football game? What is it that you felt that the Fish were lacking, or could be expanded upon that Knuckles brings?
Well, they certainly don't need any more strikers,
Fair.
When I mentioned before, there are certain design spaces that are closing up a bit quicker than some others. Fish is, I think it's fair to say that Fish are in that bracket where it's a little bit more difficult to design players for them, because having closed off having momentous damage on the playbooks at all, that's quite a big thing to take out of a Guild Ball team.
It's an aspect of the game, effectively.
Yeah, exactly. But we then kind of reopened it for ourselves when we allowed them to have a few more takeout options that don't include momentous damage, and you can play that with Corsair quite easily when you've got coup de grace. You could even theoretically play that with Shark if you want to give Shark a bit of a 2-2 game.
Sure.
You know that you can take models now that have reasonable potential to put into inflict damage and inflict takeouts. You just know it's not going to be momentous, and you kind of accept that as your game plan going into it, and that's a completely valid option that's there for you. And it was just it's that part of the game that we knew that we wanted to buff up a little bit more. And obviously it kind of made it straightforward when we know exactly the kind of person and character that Knuckles is coming into the team. It just kind of made it a bit of a slam dunk for us. We know exactly the kind of character he's going to be. Let's build him more around this kind of thing. He doesn't seem like the kind of person that's going to come in and suddenly realize he wants to be a striker, for instance. Yeah. It just made a lot of sense for the character to build him in this way, and it just happened to be one of the places within the Fish team that we could still build out without giving them an 11 millionth striker.
I could almost hear the disturbance in the force when you said that Fish don't need more strikers. I know Connor is upset and he doesn't know why right now, but I shall have to break it to him slowly. Edge then. This is a fascinating lady, I have to admit.
Yep.
Given Matt's sort of bombshell at SteamCon that Edge is Skather's sister, is there then are you almost sort of pushed towards making her Skathery, if that makes sense, or
not so much that particular bombshell. I guess it was that in combination with the fact that we'd also said that she's a very skillful football player. Those two elements combined kind of give you this character that we've got in front of us, and this was definitely among the hardest to design of the free shooter draft minis.
Okay.
Just because it's, don't know how to phrase this. I guess there are constraints that design was coming up against within Hunters, and at the same time, Hunters have already got a reasonable amount of high damage dealing models, so we wouldn't, for instance, have been able to just make her into a slightly more football-y Jakar, because that completely invalidates the design space that Jakar has, where he is a reasonable fighter that just happens to sometimes score goals by the fact that he's that fast. He's up there occasionally. And it took us quite a bit of time to determine what to do with the model, but in the end, I think we've come up with something that we're quite happy with overall. It's a footballing model in the sense that the Hunters don't have anything quite like this in their other football models, with either with Veteran Hearn or with what's his name, Egret. But we could also take some of the existing elements of the Hunters and throw them into here. Like Mirage, for instance, is a rule I'm really happy with, because I've always wanted to sort of return. Whilst they're never going to have as much placement effect as say the Miners, for instance. There is a reasonable amount of placement effects within the Hunters design space, and we knew that was something we could tap a little bit more into. We played around with whether Edge was going to be a trapper at one point as well.
Okay.
Decided against it in the end. But
she is with Steeljaw. Hooray!
Yeah. Well, I kind of decided against it, kind of because Steeljaw was in development at a similar
You got that
time.
option, yeah.
Yeah. So we were just like, well, we like to add more trappers to the Hunters team, but we don't need to do that with Edge because we know Steeljaw's coming. So
and it also means
we
that
sort of turned away from it.
When she is with Steeljaw and she won't have access to anything to make use of Mirage that isn't already on the pitch, she has big game traps instead, which is lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Close control was probably the thing that surprised me the most. Like, I think, and I think you've probably played more Hunters than me, that this is the first token defensive tech that the Hunters have ever had. They've not been ones usually for the sturdies, the close controls, the stoics, or anything like that.
Yeah, not many of them at all. I think it was a conversation me and Bryce had where we knew that, without going overboard with it, that more of if we're going to keep designing 1-inch melee zone football models, then we need to think about whether they're going to have whether it's appropriate on a case-by-case basis for them to have close control or not, just because there are a number of times we've tried to make 1-inch melee zone models that are concerned with the ball and kind of only don't work because of the prevalence of tackle-related counterattacks. Just messing more so than anything else, messing with their influence. Because they only obviously trying to go for a goal will often be quite influence intensive, where they've got to do dodges, attacks to generate momentum, tackle the ball, etc. And a counter attack that is as simple as just taking the ball back and making them tackle it again can often be enough to ruin a striker's day.
And that's sort of my role as pundit, trying to explain to people that rules like stoic and sturdy and close control aren't there to stop a thing; they're to make it harder. They're not like a no. They're just something you use to make that influence spend less efficient, and that is in many times all you need for it to be able to do.
Yes, and also more than that, the genesis of the idea of it's quite an old idea. That it's one of the original things from the start of Guild Ball is we didn't want to have many rules that just said no to players. You can't do this, which is why we've got so many you can't do this the first time abilities. Because then the intention for there is that it actually it doesn't completely shut off a plan for an opponent. That you just have to know that you're going to have to sink more resources into getting around it.
Yeah.
What it should do, hopefully, for the person playing with it, is provide them with more options, and that they can do a certain thing because they have a limited amount of immunity without completely shutting off that as a counter plan, as a counterplay for the opponent. It was the original intention. It's been quite a while since I spoke about that, actually, but I think that's still relatively true. And obviously, there are other that's not even taking into account that people have the constraints of resources. So sometimes you're going to choose not to try and knock down a sturdy model just because you can't afford those extra attacks.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that is a player choice. In how you build your team to have more or less knockdown models, or how you make your choice in terms of whether you even attack them in the first place or put your resources somewhere else. But we're just getting off quite a bit of a tangent there.
No, it's good. It's good to understand sort of the. I mean, I could sit here and for 2 hours and go, this model is cool in a variety of different sentences, and I will because they are. But also, it's interesting to hear like the design philosophy behind them as to what they're trying to achieve, and it certainly makes sense. Yeah. Hunters haven't really had that traditional goal scoring model. They've had models that do it as a byproduct of other things that they're up to. I like whenever I've played Hunters that the models that score goals for me aren't necessarily ones that are banging in shots from miles away like we were just talking about with the farmers, but rather they've got a 9-inch move and dodges for days and just happen to end up next to the goal with the ball.
Yeah, precisely. And speaking of her all-out pace, that's where we get another one of these really interesting rules in terms of how she gains extra dodges. Just because one of the things that we realised we hadn't done for quite a while, and it's always a fun thing to tap back to, is we hadn't actually put many new rules into Hunters that benefit them for attacking something that's snared. And that's something that we did quite a lot originally because of isolated target. We haven't done it much since then, and we knew it was something else that we'd love to return to.
And it's always damage related.
Yes, it was always damage related previously, and there was something else I was going to say. No, that was it. It was when we decided not to make Edge into a trapping model, but we knew that this could be something that came in as a replacement.
Gotcha.
And that we could tap into that. Let's allow the Hunters to sort of take a bit more control of the snared condition again, in that they can get more benefits from it generally than many of their opponents can.
Sure.
Just as the Alchemists can with fire and poison. Sorry. Anyway, so unorthodox, just throwing you an extra dodges in on that for whenever you're attacking a snared model. That means you can get some pretty hilarious, like, was it quintuple dodge results?
Sextuple is the fact that she needs some help from her sister.
Yep.
But with Blessing of the Moon Goddess and Winter's Night, that against the snared target is a momentous tackle. Dodge. Which I love it. I absolutely love it. I know. I imagine this might be an area where people just go, "Are you out of your mind, Steamforged?" But the idea of I know like Panzer's been crying out. He loves Skather. He loves playing Skather, but he's been looking for a model to like partner with her in terms of strike, and it's just like, here you go, mate. Like this is absolutely ridiculous. But I love Entangle as well. I think that's an amazing result. Because it's going to allow you to snowball snared. Because of course it's not once per turn. It is off the book. It is momentous. It is a 6-inch range. It's entirely reasonable for Edge to go into an already snared model and then just punch them a bunch of times and throw snared out all over the shop.
Well, you could chain it along, couldn't you? If you go into a model that's already snared, you could go in, hit the Momentous to entangle, dodge because they're already snared, target the entangle at your next target, and then jump to them and make your next attack, and then keep doing that.
And just keep going and keep going, and then at the end of it all, teleport off into a tree.
Yeah. Why not?
Because why not? Because you haven't got enough ridiculous activations and hunters. I love it. I think this is really. And the other thing I really like about it is it's not tied to a damage component.
Yeah.
So it's not like Hunter's Prey on Theron, where if I damage this model, then X, damage. So you don't have to muck around with tough hide models about whether or not they're affected by the conditions. It's just a handing out of a condition. So
all Veteran Hearn's teleporting ability, like lunar eclipse, that's tied to damage, I think, still.
Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to seeing Edge on the pitch, if only because she's going to do some absolutely crazy things, and then when I catch up to her, she's going to go down like a sack of potatoes because she's only 4-0 with 13 health. Her double disengage is on 3 when she's TAC 4, so she's going to do some stupid things, but then she's going to die, and I'm fine with that. There's a nice amount of balance there. So well done. Right then, back to your guild and mine, Mr. Gaffer.
The main event of the evening.
Certainly the way my head works. So, Morticians, sort of concentrate on them for a moment. They have always seemed, control heavy, low health, not great kicks, and a playbook that is just out of reach of a sweet spot. Sort of how I'd always describe the philosophy for Gaffer. The philosophy for Morticians, and it certainly seems.
I can quote. I can give you a small quote here from the Morticians.
The big booko Mortician
design overview.
The Necronomicon, if you will.
Yeah, that's not bad. I might rename the page that. Which is their playbooks are consistently inconsistent.
Yes. They always just seem to be. Oh, if only I had an extra crowder. If only I was TAC 6 instead of TAC 5, which of course Morn does a great deal to address, which is one of the reasons I'm a big fan of her, because she really turns on their playbooks. I've often been quoted as saying, I always look at the first 2 columns of a model to determine what it's principally there for. And with Gaffer, I don't think that's really true.
No, not really.
All right,
but equally, there are some models in the game that are not defined by their playbooks, I think.
No, sure. That momentous TAC on 2, nice to see, especially on a TAC 5 model, not awful, but it doesn't really say a great deal about him for me. But I'll ask the same sort of questions that I've asked for the other ones. Is what space within the design of the guild are you looking for Gaffer to fulfill?
So, strangely, within the Morticians, they have quite a lot of workhorse models. They do varying specific things, but there's already quite a lot of models that just go and physically do things in the game. And that was always one of my concerns with the Morticians starting out with Guild Ball, is that I never wanted them to turn into a guild that had a ton of tech pieces and no one that actually just goes and plays the game.
Yeah.
And we've got to a point now with the Morticians where they actually have quite a reasonable number of people to just go and play the game. So we can now go and address all of the extra fluffy, silly, control-y, random stuff that they want to do instead. And Gaffer certainly fits into the more of that archetype. I guess you could say he's a support player, if you want to talk in general terms. And that's why, as you're looking at his playbook, he's got a handy, such as you are, momentum push on the first column just for generate momentum, but he's not there for his playbook really. If he's if he's attacking things, it's probably just to generate momentum or because you're a bit desperate. But he's mainly there for his character plays and his character traits, which are pretty awesome, I think, at least anyway.
Yes, I don't know. I do think that push is going to be very, very useful, mainly because of Red Fury.
Yeah.
Of just, nudging. If you've got a Gaffer, if there's someone just outside of Gast's 2-inch melee zone, and Gaffer can go in and push him in, and then Red Fury Gast to attack him or what have you, or that, I think is going to be a very, very useful. That push is going to be incredibly useful in that part. The other one that sort of comes to mind is if you've inadvertently or perhaps foolishly procced casket time and someone's double disengaged away, Red Fury and that push essentially give you the opportunity to hopefully cover that mistake, because of course casket time lasts until the end of the turn.
Yep.
Hopefully that rule should never ever come up and you've casket timed at the right moment, but with Gaffer you do have something of an out. Careless Whisper, love the name, well done. That's going to be a really, it's incredibly powerful ability, particularly as these wrap turns, they don't drop off. But to either spend 2/3 of his possible influence allocation, or require 4 net hits, or with it getting 4 inches to hard cast, Careless Whisper seems a very, very difficult play to get off and to make the most out of.
It's certainly not going to be the thing that Gaffer spends most of his time doing, I would imagine. The most often times you'll see Careless Whisper being used, I suspect, is when the Morticians have jailed a model and it's the end of a turn.
Yeah.
Or just generally at the end of the turn, specifically because it wraps the turn. It's a fantastic way of setting up whatever you want to go first with in the following turn. So that's probably where you'll see it used most. Or perhaps even he's just in range to sort of sprint and throw it at somebody, and you've already won the momentum race. Or for whatever reason, the momentum race has already been determined overall, and you want that there to try and get your leg up in the following turn. Basically, is where I think it's going to be used most. But the majority of the time, I suspect Gaffer's going to be using Red Fury more than anything else. Just allowing the Morticians to sort of twist that knife a little bit further when it comes into those the scrums that they do choose to get themselves entangled within.
Yeah.
And the amount of things that you can do that are just a bit silly within the Morticians is just humorous. So you can, I'll just take 6 unmaskings this turn instead of the usual 3. Or
7 memory attacks.
Yeah, perhaps even just, they've actually managed to stand up after I've knocked everybody down with Gast. I'll just do 3 more attacks and knock them all down again. Or I'm going to use Pelage to put singled out on a target she's going to hit before she activates. Or I'm going to use Veteran Graves and do knockdown they ain't tough before I do Veteran Graves' activation later in the turn. All this stuff is very, very useful for using Red Fury. Or perhaps Obulus has got himself into one too many melee zones and you don't quite want to use unpredictable movement yet. I'll just make him do a Red Fury attack to try and dodge away. He hasn't activated or etc. There's a heck of amount of flexibility there, which is going to be very different to the way Red Fury is used within the Union, where most of the time it's there to just make sure you get those extra kills.
So I'm glad you bring Union up, because how difficult a process was it to take a previously captain unique ability and put it onto a squaddy?
It's not the first time that we've done it. But we know that whenever we do it, we have to do it with extreme care and try to make sure that we're doing it to not invalidate that captain model. And I think we've done that reasonably well with Gaffer in the fact that not only does he have the cap of 2/3 influence, but on top of that, he is also, I think, a very, very easy model to take out in terms of Morticians.
Yes.
And even though Morticians have got quite low health pools, you can put teams on a table that are quite difficult to get takeouts from. You could have, for instance, Casket, who's got the tough hide, Gast, who's got the fear and rising anger, so he's difficult to get into and a decent counterattack. Obulus has some predictable movement. You've got Pelage with empathy. And obviously you can have Morn, who can then put empathy onto any model that she likes on a team. You can actually, even though they've got quite low, statistically low health pools, you can have a Morticians team that's not super easy to get takeouts out of. Whereas Gaffer doesn't fit that archetype at all. He is only a 3/1 model with 16 health boxes, and that's it. He doesn't have a good counterattack. He's only got a 1-inch mana zone. He's going to be someone that, if you get him too close to the fight, he will probably evaporate.
And he's not got a good counter. Right,
he's got a terrible counter. So he's someone that you can get a heck of a lot of work out of, but he's probably one of the highest risk reward models that are in the Morticians Guild once that he gets in there. Outside of perhaps Scalpel, but at least in the squad, he's one of the highest risk reward models that you've got the option to use, which is going to be really loved by some Mortician players and not so much by others. But that's also fine, because it creates discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. The knowledge is phenomenal. Like, I'm a big fan of that. The idea of a 3/8 Scalpel is quite something. Or just Bonesaw having a 3/10 kick. Is this sort of that kind of Gaffer's background of being a student of the game, of trying to get more out of those around him rather than sort of doing things himself.
Yeah, absolutely. This is where most of his abilities have been inspired by that backstory element of him having a bit more knowledge and worldly experience, and he's got these contacts in other places and stuff like this. And weirdly, that's kind of where the backstory inspiration actually for Careless Whisper comes from, is this idea that he's actually got friends in different places, friends in low places, shall we say. And someone's gone, oh, this player that you're going to play against has got a bit of a weak knee. And that has an on-pitch representation of Careless Whisper, of going, that's the weakness, go after it.
Yeah, very much when we were sort of embroiled in the draft, the pitch that I made to other Morticians players is I wanted Obulus's spy. And I think like Careless Whisper has really, and the knowledge to a certain extent has really encapsulated that, in that it's Brick's got a dislocated knee from his match last week. Just go in and you'll do more. So I love the idea of that. He has a legendary play.
He does. For
which I will say no more other than thank you. I have one Gill Ball. Appreciate that. The ability, this is where I think Careless Whisper, when you talked about having a jailed model and then bouncing that around, this is where I think Careless Whisper is really going to see some fantastic use, because of course there is no range on it other than a model on the pitch, because it needs to be targeted. But if I've got, I don't know, a 2/1 model at my feet, and I can put a Careless Whisper token on it and then legendary that off onto a much high value target,
right,
in terms of either being a captain or being a 5/0 model or something along those lines. I think that's a great combination that's you're always going to get use out of.
I mean, it's as you say, really, there's so many different things you can do with it. One of the things that I can imagine doing with it quite often is whatever is my first engagement with the opponent, if they are being quite cagey with their captain, for instance, like Bryce is all the time, he will never let, like, I've never casket timed Thresher, which is something
come on,
against Bryce, I've never casket timed Thresher, at least. And it's because he's very, very good at keeping his captain alive. One of the things he could do with Gaffer is, as soon as you engage with any of the farmers models, is stick a Careless Whisper out and then immediately legendary to put it on Thresher, and he can't get it off. And he's just got that axe that's just swinging over his head for the rest of the game, that he's got to be even more careful about. And that, just a huge amount of versatility. And we are going to, I know you might feel a bit odd about talking about it, but I'm gonna, which is the name of the play. Now it works on so many different levels, because obviously we know that we wanted him to be have this idea of people whispering into him, people into his ears, and obviously if people have got the miniature at this point, which they should have seen, I think at least on a render, you'll notice that we've done this thing that I think is really cool, where you've got the sort of spectre of what is meant to be Gast literally whispering into his ear, and you can see from the artwork that there's a lot of stuff going through his head at once, and he's not necessarily there all the time. It might be Gast that's suggesting things to him, or he's in control or whatever. There's a lot of different things bubbling around in that noggin, and so it's a really cool thing to represent on the table. And on top of that, it was just a nice thing to be able to do. Ultimately, we place quite high value on everyone that is part of the media network and does spends so much time doing podcasts and creating content for Guild Ball. It's an amazing, wonderful thing, and it's not a competition ultimately. But if there was a record of how many hours people have sunk into creating content, you'd probably be the person that's put the most hours in, or at least be up there with the people that have. Because the amount of content you've created for the game is wonderful, and it was this is a small thank you from us for doing that.
Well, I'm very touched by that, and I look forward to if for 1 week only, hearing the words "handy listener such as you are" on every single Guild Ball podcast. That will be hilarious for me. I don't do well with compliments, so I'm going to move on quite quickly. Appreciate that. So with these the models as a whole. And yes, the thing with Ghast over the shoulder is quite funny. The guy that paints my Morticians team, Dom, when he painted them last time, he's like, "Shall I do Ghast as a ghost?" And I was like, "No, because I have a sneaking suspicion." And and now he gets to paint Ghast as a ghost, which is going to be lovely. Yeah. With these all coming out, so hopefully by the time that people are listening to this, you'll be able to pre-order them, or may even have them sort of winging their way to you. I'm not quite sure how the timing is working. I'd be remiss of me not to ask, but what is the plan going forwards in terms of the remaining rookies?
So the intention for that is that they will be timed similarly to, or as close to as possible, the release of the legacy teams. So what we've done with this release is we've kind of done a bit of catch up in that we've already got these legacy teams out there, and Morticians of Hunters, etc., already out in the open. So we've wanted to make sure we caught ourselves up with. And then as the rest of the legacy teams are releasing, then you should be seeing their free series draft model coming along at a very similar time. And that allows us to one of the things that we've definitely not done as well this year with Guild Ball's releases is we had a very quiet period in the first few months, and then we had March, which was just nuts, and then we went quiet again after that, which is not something that I personally am a fan of at all, and it's obviously not something that's ideal. We want to keep a much more consistent release cycle, so that's something that we can do for the rest of the year. I get it, people will possibly be a little bit disappointed that they're not all out at once, but at the same time, it's also nice to make sure that people have got something new to talk about over consistently, I guess.
Also, those of us that collect everything, it means I'm not paying out for 11 new guild models in one go. I can spread my budget out, hopefully.
Yeah, but it means that we've got releases coming out now for the rest of the year. In addition to other things as well, we've got the rest of the captains to do, and obviously the rest of the legacy teams themselves. And it just means that Guild Ball will have, from this point onwards, a more consistent release cycle for the remainder of the year, rather than this being sort of this enormous dump of information then silence, because nobody really enjoys that. It's just not good for anybody at all. Perfect. So yeah, that's what it is. They're gonna try and be timed similarly to maybe not the exact same as, but similarly to their
close as you can.
Legacy team, yes.
Because I imagine, contrary to popular belief, you guys want all of your toys out as quickly as possible as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna rehash the video that Loxon made recently, which I think explained a lot of that stuff quite well overall. But ultimately, we want people to be able to play with their toys. We want people to keep loving Guild Ball, and it's. The legacy teams are going to be out. I think the plan that we talked about is that they're going to be out by the end of the year, and that's looking like, as far as everything that I can see, and I work in the same room as the project managers, that all seems to be on track for the moment, which is great. And we want that. If it could happen any sooner, it would be happening sooner. But
I'm sure
we are where we are.
Perfect. Jamie, lovely. Thank you very much for taking the time to have a chat with me today. Very much looking forward to seeing these new rookies on the pitch. Like I said, we appreciate the insight, sort of the peek behind the developer curtains, and hopefully everyone will have these models in their hands soon. Lovely. Well, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I hope this has been enjoyable, and no doubt we will have more content just as there's more to show you. And as ever, handy viewer, handy listener, such as you are, I need a better outro.
Oh my God. Becky, look at his beard. It's just so